Hey, what's up guys? This is Carson and welcome back to another video. I am sorry that I am beardless. Some people think I look fine, some people think I look not as good, and some people prefer this. I just want to say I'm growing it back. Now that that very important discussion and topic is out of the way, I thought that today I would make a video talking about some very underrated soundtracks both in video games and in movies that I really like that I think are not appreciated as much as others. This is not in any specific order or anything. These are just soundtracks that I really like from composers that are fairly well known within the movie industry, but these soundtracks just aren't as mainstream, I feel like. Like, for example, whenever you think about movie soundtracks, you'll think of like Star Wars, think of maybe Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, Harry Potter. Mostly you'll think of like John Williams stuff, some maybe some Hans Zimmer stuff, but as far as, some other soundtracks that are not as appreciated, I have a list of ones that I think need more appreciation, and I will talk about a few of them in this video. This video won't be promoted as much because I will be using video or like content from video games and trailers, and then playing a little bit of some of the soundtrack from each of them in this video, so it won't be as shared around by the YouTube algorithm. So that being said, please share this around if you love soundtrack stuff and just want to promote this video and help me out. So whenever I listen to video game soundtracks, film soundtracks, whatever kind of soundtrack, what does it for me that makes it really good is a good combination of sound design, some really cool sound design with electronics and everything, and a combination of that with some more orchestral elements. Whenever it comes to scores, I don't like a majority of the scores that are mostly all instrumental orchestral stuff. For example, Michael Giacchino, he does a lot of that kind of stuff. That's why for most of his soundtracks, I'm not a huge avid fan of his. But for example, with some stuff like his Batman soundtrack, some of the stuff from Up, and stuff like that, I'll listen and like some of those. But for example, whenever it comes to the kind of music I generally like, it comes down to like what Hans Zimmer does with combining the two, Junkie XL. So all these composers that combine more electronic, really cool sound design stuff to orchestral stuff and combine the two really well. So in your guys' opinion, you might hate these soundtracks, but you might like them. These are just, in my opinion, some very underrated ones. Starting off is the soundtrack for the movie Tenet. It was done by Ludwig Göransson, who also worked on Black Panther, Creed, and some other movies. It was as a film directed by Chris Nolan in, I believe it was 2020. This score did not win any awards. It was overlooked severely, and in my opinion, it should, in my opinion, change how action music in films should start changing and sounding more like this score a little bit. Obviously, not copying it exactly, but for example, how Hans Zimmer kind of set a whole new trend with his Inception and everything. I feel like this movie should be looked upon and praised highly because of how complicated some of the rhythms are, how complicated some of the mixing must have been for him to combine all these sounds that are, a lot of them are electronic, but some of them are orchestral. And since all this happened during COVID, a lot of the stuff that he did had to be online with the orchestral stuff, with people recording them, playing strings and then combining them together and everything. And some of the percussion stuff is really cool in this soundtrack. So I will play a little bit of one of my favorite songs from this soundtrack. Next is the Death Stranding soundtrack. And while the game itself is, people are kind of meh about it, the soundtrack is very good. It was done by a composer that I cannot pronounce the name, but it's another composer with the name Ludwig in it. And it does a very good job of combining orchestral sounds, a lot of strings, with some really, really cool sound design with electronics and everything. There's a really cool blend of the two in this one. A lot of what makes the soundtrack good for me, I think, is primarily the atmosphere and the textures of it all. It's done very well, and it's, like I said, it combines the two elements of what I think makes soundtracks really unique and good. And it does a great job of blending that with piano strings and just a whole lot of things to make a really interesting textured soundtrack and with some really cool feels. I really like the kind of aesthetic that it brings to the game, even though again the game itself is considered to be basically just a pizza delivery service simulator. And here is a snippet of one of my favorite songs from that soundtrack as well. Next up is the Army of the Dead soundtrack, which is a Netflix film directed by Zack Snyder, who directed 300 and the Snyder Cut of Justice League and everything. And the composer for that was Junkie XL, aka Tom Hulkenberg. Junkie is one of my favorite composers out there. He did a lot of stuff with Hans Zimmer, and that's kind of how he became, one of the more bigger film composers, because he helped them with Man of Steel, I believe, and then that transitioned into Batman versus Superman, and he started doing his own films and everything. And he scored films like Mad Max Fury Road. He did score Snyder Cut as well. And Attila Battle Angel. There's a lot of things that he's done, and he has some of my favorite percussion sounds of all time. But besides that, he comes from an electronic dance music background, kind of like I do. So it's really cool that he came from that background. I do. He also gave me that shout out for winning that Snyder Cut Flash Remix contest, which that was really cool, and thought I'd plug that here too, just for fun. But in this soundtrack, he does a lot of really cool vocal sound design and a lot of just cool sound design in general. And I don't believe there's just a whole lot of orchestral elements. There's some really this soundtrack has one of my favorite piano sounds of all time for sure. The only other piano sound that rivals this, in my opinion, personal preference wise, is the piano used in the Quiet Place soundtracks. Those were really good. Those were done by Marco Beltrami. But this soundtrack is amazing. There's just so many good songs. I really recommend you check them out. I'm going to play a little bit of one of my favorites, but there's some really cool action stuff, and there's some really cool, more ambient stuff in this soundtrack. And it's not a super long soundtrack either, but it's really well done and really well produced. And finally on today's video is He-Man Revelations. It's a Netflix series that came out recently. I watched it, being a He-Man fan. It's not very good, but I will say that the soundtrack is very good. Now, this doesn't really have just, the not generic, but like what I kind of normally go for whenever it comes to listening to soundtracks, with the sound design and everything, of a lot of electronic sounds combined with orchestral. But the way everything sounds, the melodies, the way they're played on horns, the way the drums come in, just how everything works together in it, just really, for me, it does it for me. It was done by Bear McCreary, I think is how you say his last name, who's also scored like Godzilla, King of Monsters, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and stuff like that. And he did an amazing job with this. There's not really any detailed explanation for why I like this, like there is for the others, about how there's different sound design and everything. But it's just really cool the way it all sounds, and just the melodies and everything. To me, it's really powerful, and it's just so well done. I really don't know what else to say. It just sounds really cool. Here's a little bit of that. And that's all I have for this video. I have a list, but I just thought I'd go over some of them. These ones probably being my favorites of the most underrated soundtracks that I have listed in my opinion. Let me know if you'd like another video like this with more underrated soundtracks for the future, and I will look into making that depending on, how many people want that. So thank you guys for watching this video, and have a great day.